welcome everybody to another Therapist Connect broadcast. This debate that we're having today is quite special actually, because we've invited from therapists from different parts of the world to talk about their practice and what it's like to be a therapist in their corner of the world. This debate is one of a multitude of debates that we're having over this week for the Therapist Connect's first birthday. If you're interested in accessing some of the ones that we've already released, if you have a look on our website, the details of which are running along the bottom of your screen right now, as well as the rest of our social media details, if you want to reach out and connect with us in other ways. My name's Dr. Peter Blundell, and I'm a lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University in counselling and psychotherapy. I'm delighted to be joined today by two really special therapists from very different parts of the world to talk a little bit about their practice and what it's like to practice in their corner of the world. So our first panelist is Prachi S. Vash, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and a certified clinical trauma specialist. She's completed her MA and MPhil in clinical psychology and has been working in the field of mental health for over 15 years. She's the founder of the Emotional Wellness Initiative, a venture that provides niche mental health and wellness services. She has also founded India's first online psychotherapy website in 2019. She's contributed to thousands of articles on various aspects of mental health for both web and print media, like Feminar.in, Child, Better Homes and Gardens, Lifestyle Asia India, and tweakindia.com. She's been interviewed by leading newspapers and dailies like the Times of India, Hindustan Times, and The Week for her pioneering work in digital psychotherapy. And she works with clients on the issues of relationships, intimacy, anxiety disorders, and recovery from trauma of emotional abuse. So Prachi, welcome to this panel today.
Thank you, Peter. Namaste to everyone who's listening from India.
Thank you.
Peter, now I just feel like a total goof when you're about to read.
Well, so just to explain, so I asked everyone to provide a bio, and this is Ari's bio that he's provided, which I actually really love. So don't feel like that at all. So Ari Shapiro is a therapist in Canada, and he wanted to say this about himself when I asked for a bio. So he says, "We all know that therapist bios can sometimes sound pretty similar. So I'm hoping whatever the guy before or after me said kind of covers it. Here's what you might not know about me. I'm a musician. I write songs, short stories, and poetry. I love comedy and love using my imagination. I produce a podcast called Who's Your Therapist, where therapists are interviewed and revealed to be vulnerable, courageous, everyday people with common struggles of their own. I study Bruce Lee's art of, I'm going to get this wrong, Jeet Kune Do.
You got it.
I'm a big, worried about saying that. I'm a big fan of Japanese anime, thanks to my younger and not so younger clients. So look, it's no secret that problems can feel serious and heavy enough on their own. It doesn't mean that therapy has to feel that way too. That's why after 15 years, I love what I do. Seriously, if I won the lottery, I'd just keep doing this. And that says something, right?"
Thank you, Peter.
I love that.
That was lovely. That was lovely.
It's really nice. So thank you both very much for coming and doing this panel today. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to be sitting with you and to have some conversation about therapy.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
So I suppose the first question that I'd probably come to, which I think our audience might be interested in, is to find out a little bit about where you practice in the world. And maybe just your own perceptions about counselling and psychotherapy in your particular country. How do you perceive the profession? I don't know who'd like to go first.
You pick.
Yeah, moderator.
Yeah.
Okay, Prachi, should we come to you first?
Okay, sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. So, like I said, I practice in the vibrant land of India, and psychotherapy and counseling actually has been a way of life in India for the longest time. While it wasn't practiced as a profession, but if you look at the scriptures, our old scriptures like Bhagavad Gita, and you look at the teachings of Krishna and everything, um, there were always people in our land who would balance, achieve their inner balance by discipline and by meditation and focus. And then they would become these people that everybody would turn to in times of conflict and in a dilemma. So they were like, the de facto psychotherapists of the country, but it just wasn't, titled as that profession. And if you look at the teaching, then you look at I shouldn't call it teaching. If you just look at the writings, it very much relates to what we know in modern psychotherapy as mindfulness or existential therapy or even acceptance and commitment therapy. Very similar principles. So it has always been a way of life for us. Now it is coming of age. It has started to become more standardized, more professional, more training oriented. And it's really, I think the interest is really growing exponentially, just looking at the way how many people are opting for this as a career in our country. I started studying this 23 years ago, and I would get skeptical looks all the time. Why would you want to study this? Why would you want to do this? Can't you go for a more mainstream career? So yes, and now today I have almost 40-50 trainees under me who are youngsters and who are studying the subject and who are so passionate about it. And I think this particular year has really opened everyone's eyes to how important mental health can be.
Mm-hmm.
And it really needs a lot of attention, professional attention. And now, just having a shoulder to cry on doesn't cut it. You have to have people who are trained, specialized, who you can go to and who can help you, find a better way of life. And slowly, I think it is starting to evolve, less as just a mode of treatment, but also as a way of enrichment. And I've always looked at psychotherapy like that. It doesn't have to be just treatment. It can very well be a very good tool for growth and enrichment of your life. You could be a better version of yourself at any point of time, and therapy can totally help you do that.
Now, I don't know if you'd like me to chime in and speak to that for a second, because one of the things that stood out, Prachi, not just in what you were saying, but when I was thinking about the question too, is just the shift that I've seen over the last couple of decades in the attitude towards psychotherapy. And what I'm noticing more in the past year or two is I work with a lot of kids, teenagers, young adults. What I'm noticing more and more is I'm getting teenagers booking appointments with me for a couple of reasons that I'd never heard before, some of which are like a lot of my friends are doing it and it just seems kind of cool. Or I just keep hearing about it everywhere and seeing it everywhere, and I want to experience it. I don't think I've ever heard that before, especially with the younger generation. And so to me, I remember myself as a teenager and in my early 20s, trying to seek out a therapist for myself. And at that point, the internet was still in its infancy. And I remember thinking well, how do you find somebody? You got to know somebody that knows somebody, but also not a lot of people would even want to cough up to the fact that they were seeing a therapist. So while there's still a long way to go, I think, in terms of the evolution of destigmatization around therapy and mental health, I am appreciating that the shift in that trend seems to be, at least to people, feeling more at ease to talk about it and to just to be open about it.
That's true. That's very true.
Your experience too?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like you said, I think that element of curiosity has also now come in, that, people wonder what happens in a therapy session. And it just makes them want to check it out initially. And then, they want to stay because they realize that it adds value to what they are going through in their life.
Yeah.
So yes, totally. I have the other day I had a girl in 10th grade who had to do a project for her school, and she wanted to do it on mental health, and she said, can I please like talk to you about this and understand? And I was amazed at how many ideas she was coming up with, and she was like, so many of my friends I think can do with help in terms of psychotherapy. And I said, wow, that's amazing that now people, I mean, 15, 16-year-olds are able to see that and embrace that actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating, just kind of picking up on both of the points that you were talking about there. But in the UK, I would probably say it mirrors exactly what you're talking about there. This general awareness in society around mental health, what that means, talking about our feelings and emotions and things like that, and accessing therapy. I'd say in the UK, one of the difficulties I think we've got, is that we've got this greater awareness around these issues and the benefits of going to therapy, but we don't necessarily have the funding for people to access everything that they need to. So I really like what you were saying there. People kind of coming, going, oh yes, I really want to see a therapist, but actually, where do I turn to? Who do I find? And maybe I can't afford one to pay for one myself. So what do I do about that when that happens? And I think we have a bit of a kind of like a two-tier system in the UK where some people maybe of the highest need can access some services through our health service, and others have to pay for it themselves, kind of through their private practice.
Sure. So I've been fortunate that in the community that I work in, it's considered to be, obviously this is a generalization, but it's considered to be a fairly affluent community, so people can pay for psychotherapy services. I've worked in this community in the nonprofit sector, in the community mental health agencies for a long time too, and I'm not sure what it would be now, but I remember at a certain point, for communities and community members that wanted ongoing psychotherapy services, they would have programs to get people in the door and be seen when they needed to be seen. But again, the key word is ongoing services. I think there would sometimes be a wait for up to a year. And again, I don't know what that's at now in most agency settings, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Affordability is definitely an issue here as well. And therapy is sometimes seen as something that people say that we want, but then, we can't afford it. And there is no, because in India, a lot of insurance also doesn't cover psychotherapy under it. So that's definitely an issue. And we are trying to start support group services for this reason, so that it can at least become affordable for people. But then it's not, one-to-one. It's not individual psychotherapy. Support group can only do so much.
Sure.
And also, I think on the other hand, for affordability, sometimes what happens is also, what I've realized is that it's also a matter of priority. So sometimes, people would be willing to spend a lot of money going on a fancy vacation, or, buying a lot of clothes to make them feel better momentarily, but they would not be willing to spend on a therapy session which would give them skills to, have that longer lasting effect. So sometimes you have to make them aware of that angle also. And I often tell people that, you go for a pizza outing, it is going to cost you as much as a therapy session, and you can always try it out for yourself. A pizza is going to make you happy for like maybe half an hour, and then a therapy session can probably do more than that.
You mean I can't solve my problems with a boat?
I know, right?
But actually, that's really interesting. But also, I was thinking about that point you were making earlier around not just accessing therapy just when you say you've got a problem, but that idea of self-exploration and personal growth. And I think personally, I've seen a shift in people kind of accessing therapy for that reason. Actually, I've got some things I just want to reflect on. It's not necessarily causing me this massive problem at the moment, but I'd like to kind of work through it, talk about it, and see where that leads me, just in terms of growth and reflection. And I've seen a shift there where I think there's much more people here in the UK accessing therapy for that reason, for sure.
So Peter, I have a question about that for you. And I may have even posed this to you in one of our chats or emails before, but probably going back at least 10 years ago, I connected with a couple of social workers from the UK, and I remember I was telling one of them that I was going to a session with my therapist, and I got this look of a bit of like incredulity, and I came to just inquire about that and be curious about that, and the feedback that I got was that her impression was that really only people who needed to be hospitalized went to therapy. Was that more the understanding in decades past?
I
Oh
think
yes, in India it still is like that, quite a bit.
Okay.
I think it will depend, obviously, to people's understanding of therapy at that time. I do think there has been a massive shift, probably recently, probably in the last 10 years, where it's become much more acceptable to kind of say, actually, I've been for therapy. It was couple, we worked together on something as a couple, or I've had this problem, so I went to see a therapist about it. It's definitely becoming much more open, I think, and people are discussing it much more freely. I think the stigma of that has gone a lot, actually. But I've always found it interesting, the UK, say, versus the United States, where I almost feel like the United States feels quite open in terms of accessing therapy, almost kind of, people talk about it very openly, and kind of, if you haven't got a therapist, it's a bit kind of like, why haven't you got one?
Right.
I don't think the UK is there quite yet, but I do think we have moved forward quite a lot, actually. Yes, in the last 10 years or so, definitely.
Sure. Cool.
Yeah, it's really curious. I wonder, sometimes what is it that makes so I have clients, in their late 30s and 40s who are using therapy for because they're feeling stuck in life, and they're saying that I suddenly, like, my kids are grown up, and then I don't know where I am and what do I want from here on. So they would really readily accept therapy as a means to kind of move forward and do a lot of self-reflection and all of that. And then on the other hand, there are also people, and this has absolutely nothing to do with economic status, class. It's just, I just see this divide all the time. And on the other hand, there are people who will say that, oh, you know what, in my marriage, I'm fighting with my husband every day, and we just don't seem to see eye to eye. But that's the only problem. So please don't suggest a therapist. Tell me what to do. I see these posts in these groups so often that I don't think this requires a therapist. I really don't need a therapist. Just tell me, give me your suggestions, and I'll figure it out on my own. So this it's very curious why this divide is there, and I really wonder what are the factors that push people or motivate people to actually seek therapy for growth.
Right.
But I suppose there's also that understanding as well from people about what a therapist is, and if you think, well, it's, for someone who's got really, really deep rooted mental health problems, and and they're the only people who go to see a therapist, then that's going to be your assumption, isn't it? Until you hear somebody talk about an experience of just going for personal growth, you're not likely to know that it can be used in that way, I suppose.
Right. That's a question I thankfully I don't get too often, which is tell me what to do. But my favorite answer to that is often, well, you don't need me for that. There's this thing called Google, and it's actually really good for that.
That's a good one.
You don't get one answer on Google, though, do you?
You could have a field day with that.
Totally.
I feel like we've covered kind of that question, Ari, but had you said what you wanted to say kind of about your perceptions of therapy in Canada? I just wanted to check whether there was anything extra there you wanted to add.
I mean, for the most part, yeah. I mean, I've been working exclusively in private practice for the last 3 years. So I do feel out of touch in certain aspects of the field because I am a bit more isolated now. But my sense was things were starting to move in a more sort of kind of government sort of policy in the implementation of mental health services. It was feeling like it was starting to become a little bit more manualized and a little bit more streamlined, which can have its advantages and some big disadvantages. So things were starting to happen with that at the time where I was really just at a point which was like, I got to get out of here. There's just too much conflictual expectations of how we were expected to practice, or sort of relate assessment services or treatment services with clients that would sometimes bump up against what they needed and where they were at. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, where you're sort of mandated to do a certain assessment, like a standardized assessment tool, where you sort of have this inkling that the questions that you're going to have to ask are going to be more triggering to the clients than helpful. Right.
Yeah, I know what you
So
mean.
just some of that stuff was it always rubbed me the wrong way, and feeling like my hands were a bit tied. And so I would just try to get around certain aspects of that the best I could.
It's that complete difference, isn't it, between that kind of in private practice where you are able to kind of be free to be who you want to be as a therapist and not restricted in any way, which I think is a wonderful thing. I've worked in some organizations and community projects where the sessions are restricted to 6 sessions. Like you say, there's an assessment criteria that you've kind of got to go down, and actually it becomes very impersonal a lot of the time. You do feel quite restricted actually in terms of what you can do as a practitioner. And I think there's a similar issues here in the UK really. Perhaps you're nodding along, so it sounds like there's it's the same.
Totally. That's the reason I moved to private practice myself.
Okay. Well, I'd heard stories of like these sort of standardized assessment tools being implemented to gather information before treatment. And I've heard stories of people leaving those sessions and trying to kill themselves because they were so upset and distressed by just the questions that were being asked.
Yeah.
Right. So I made sure at times, whenever I felt like I was in a position where I was being told I have to implement this assessment tool, I would sort of get around it by I would explain very clearly to the client what the purpose of the assessment was. From all the different levels, right? This wasn't just about us gathering information. It wasn't just about helping them to clarify it was also about stakeholder information, and it was about collecting data. And so I would thoroughly explain the purpose of it. And then I would say, you have the right to say no if you don't want this. And almost all of them would say no, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's really a truly informed choice, isn't it? Actually, full disclosure and information and transparency and giving somebody the option. You really don't have to fill this in if you don't.
Well, I don't think a lot of the higher ups liked that I did that.
No, I bet they didn't. You had no statistics.
Yeah.
So moving on then a little bit.
Sure.
To our next question, which might be quite interesting actually to hear this from our different perspectives, but just about what your training was like as a therapist, really, and how what was that like in your particular country, and how you experienced that. Ari, I'm going to come to you first because I came to first last time. Is that okay?
So fortunately, at a young age, contrary to a lot of people, you sort of had this assumption that if they wanted to be a therapist, they had to be a psychologist, right? And they had to go through all the rigorous kind of different levels of degree before you could actually come out and then practice therapy, or even get to that point where you could be taught. And so fortunately, I knew from an early age that you can do that as a social worker. So it was like a no-brainer for me. From high school, I went right into a Bachelor of Social Work program, and then later did my Master's of Social Work. And I got again, it's been a while since I've been out of school academically. The social work field is so incredibly broad that the emphasis on the clinical therapy part of the work is really sort of segregated into this like little tiny quadrant, and it's really not the focus of these academic programs. So I came out of that not really feeling prepared to do anything. don't want to like talk badly about the social work, like the academic institutions. It did seem like the trend, though, that students were coming more into the field with the hope of going into therapy, though, or going into private practice. So I did get a sense of that the academic programs might need some revision, to sort of meet the current needs of the students. In any case, so it was basically me seeking out many. I did a year-long externship program in individual, couples, and family therapy, and then I would just kind of load myself up with as many like week-long intensive trainings, 2-day trainings, 3-day, like just as much as I could, and then I started volunteering at a children's mental health agency who ran a walk-in clinic once a week. And I would volunteer there doing sessions or co-therapy. And so it was really something that had to be sought out after graduating.
I find that really interesting, and particularly because I am trained as a social worker and as a therapist in the UK.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, from the way you've described the social work training, it sounds very similar to the social work training I had, which was, it was very, very broad. And there was some mention of things like, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic, different types of therapeutic approaches, but that qualification in the UK does not kind of license you to work as a therapist.
Okay.
It is a social worker, which is a protected title in the UK. Interestingly, in the UK, we have therapy qualifications from what we call level 4, which is like college level, which is kind of the below university level. That qualifies you. They're usually about 2 years. And then you can do different qualifications at the various levels after that. So I think we're quite different from some other countries, actually, because we have qualifications at that level. But interestingly, counsellor and psychotherapist isn't a protected title in our country. So anybody could actually call themselves a counsellor or a psychotherapist in the UK, but not everybody can call themselves a social worker, which is an interesting.
And I was just going to say, and here in Canada, the title of psychotherapist has only recently become a protected title.
Okay.
And so, like in I don't know if within the last 10 years, there was the sort of implementation now of a college of psychotherapists, and so that was a new thing in Canada. And so, and that was, it sounded like some very rigorous. Like you got to prove yourself and jump through some hoops if you want to become a member of that. And now there also are university courses that reflect that. There's like, you can go into a master's of psychotherapy program now. There never used to be things like that.
Wow, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Big changes then, actually, by the sounds of
it. Yes.
Prachi, what's it like in India? What was your training like?
So I was listening to both of you, and I was thinking that there are points from here also and here also. So like I mentioned, that yes, in India we have to do that. To be a psychotherapist in India, you have to be a clinical psychologist first. So you have to do that whole graduation and post-graduation and then doctorate, and then you get your license for practicing as a psychologist. And like you mentioned, Peter, a counselor and a psychotherapist is not a protected title in India as well. So we honestly don't have any specific training to be a psychotherapist. So people who become clinical psychologists, like when I finished, so MPhil is the degree that you need to get your license. And once you get that, after that, you sort of, train yourself in some specialization, some therapeutic techniques and all of that. And then you can call yourself a psychotherapist, but there is no documentation for it. And even for counselors, it's so for counseling, you don't even have a licensing procedure. It's like you finish your master's in counseling psychology, and then you can just start working under someone and get some supervision and then start practicing. And so that's what it was like. I finished I took up psychology in 11th grade. That's where it starts from in India. You can start from there. My reasons for taking psychology were different. I took it because I had no idea about the subject, but it looked interesting, so I picked it up. And also because I wanted to get away from home and go to a boarding school to study. I come from a family where there was a lot of domestic violence happening. So I just, wanted to get out. So I picked the school which was offering the subject and which was out of my city and hometown. I got there and I studied it, and I realized that, wow, this is pretty fascinating, right? So I wanted to continue, and then I finished my undergrad in it. And by then I got a little confused whether I didn't know until then if I wanted to be a therapist, and I took a year's gap after that to think things through, because I was also studying a foreign language simultaneously. So I had this idea that I wanted to go and work for the United Nations. So I was like, okay, now I have to think about this. And then I realized that the same thing that Ari said, that if I wanted to make a career in psychology, I would have to proceed step by step. Whereas if I wanted to pursue a career in languages, I could pick it up at a later point also in life. So that kind of set track for me, and I finished my master's. And after that, so in India, you technically need a license to practice as a clinical psychologist, but there is such a huge demand for the mental health sector that the MPhil level is very selective. So you have only a few accredited institutions which offer the program, and if you only do it from there, then you get licensed. So a lot of students don't get through because obviously the entrance procedures are very rigorous. So they just start working right after their masters, and a lot of places do hire them. And that's what I also did. I did my master's and I started working at a few hospitals attached with some psychiatrists and under their supervision. But I used to keep feeling this this lack, that something is missing, I'm not like doing this right, I have to do more. And so I went back to school and enrolled for MPhil when my son was 4 years old. And I was the oldest in my class, and everybody was giving me looks. They thought I'm there to apply as faculty. They were quite shocked by it. And I got questions like, are you sure you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? In my interview, they said that, why would you want to do this? And you already seem pretty settled with your life. And I said, well, this is what I want to do. I don't think I want to stop. And I don't think that is any reason for me to stop, that I have a child or, So so I finished that for 2 years, and then I felt like, okay, now I know what it's like to be in the trenches, because the MPhil program here is very, very intensive. It's for 2 years. You're like totally attached to a hospital, and you go to the wards every day, and you practice every day, and you have to maintain logbooks and all of that. So it's a very rigorous program. So after that, I thought that, okay, now I feel like I'm a little bit confident to start working like this. And then I trained myself in other techniques, and that's how I'm in private practice. So yeah, here it's very, you can't become a psychotherapist after doing something else. Social work itself is a big field. You did talk about social work itself. By itself, it's a huge field, but you don't come from there to psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question for you guys, because, at a certain point in my career development and my educational development, it became aware to me also just by the fact that you could sort of call yourself something clever and make money talking to people for a living without any training. Yes. Right. So I think my first, and again, I have no, this isn't intended to be disparaging at all. At a certain point, I started to become more aware of people using the title like a life coach counselor.
When you said that, I was just thinking of that title.
And I'd wondered if like, I think maybe only in the last 5 years, that's become more prominent in my sort of scope of awareness. And I think even now there's starting to become like courses and training for people to do that. But yeah, I'm just curious, is that something that you've noticed emerge also around your professions and around the work that you do? Because I can see how even like the title of that can be very, very alluring, very intriguing for the public or for people. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think coaching in the UK has gone a little bit more down this kind of professionalized route where people are trying to look at the qualifications around coaching and that as a particular role. And I know that one of our membership bodies kind of takes on coaches as well. But that idea of a life coach, which, you know, people don't necessarily need to have any qualification to do, just anyone can set themselves up. I think, I mean, I've noticed that within the UK, people charge an exorbitant amounts of money actually, you know, to as experts in a particular thing, whatever it is. Some of them are not 100% sure what it is that they're an expert in, and selling that, yeah, they're almost their expertise. It's very interesting because I have heard people had conversations maybe in like social groups around accessing therapy, and some people who would be more willing to access a life coach rather than a therapist, you know, where they kind of think, oh, actually, because it sounds maybe more appealing, it sounds maybe there isn't a stigma attached to that.
Sure.
And it's that idea of personal growth, I think, that Prachi was talking about before, this idea of actually, oh, I'm going there because I'm wanting to grow as a person. I'm not necessarily kind of saying that I've got a problem or I've got any issues that I want to work through. My concern around all of that is actually practitioners who are life coaches who, you know, people are bringing traumatic experiences or talking about their trauma or really kind of difficult problems, and that those people aren't trained in that and don't really understand how to manage that actually. And I think people can do a lot of damage actually in some of those roles if they're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's true. I'm really glad I brought this up because this is exactly the trend that I'm seeing, and it is sometimes honestly very infuriating because you know, people do get drawn to titles like this because I think in the last few years the awareness around mental illnesses has really grown, but the awareness around who can provide what service hasn't come up to par.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a lot of celebrities now talking about how they battled depression or they battled a mental illness and got out on the other side, but they are also not talking about how they did that. So it's like, you know, it's like those concepts like, oh, think positive and try harder and, you know, stay on your path and you're going to get out of it. So it's like it's a stigma within the stigma, right? So it's like you have people now know that, oh, mental illness is a real thing, but we will accept it only with like 1, 2, 3 conditions. You should not be on medication. Yeah, you should not be 1, 2. So it's like that, like, you know, so somebody can come on Instagram and say that, oh, I'm battling depression, and this person will get 1 million followers. But the moment in real life if they say that, oh, I want to get on medication, then people will be like, oh, why do you want to do that? Just meditate and, you know, just do yoga and you will just snap out of it.
Right.
So because of that, this alternate, I would call it the alternate lineup of people who are willing to offer services for healing is really, really catching on. You won't believe the other day on one of the forums on Facebook, I came across some lady had posted about how she was battling with anxiety and past trauma, and she had a few abuse experiences in her life. And a graphologist comes online and she says, oh, I can help you through your handwriting analysis. I can help you with your anxiety and depression. I lost it.
Interesting.
Yeah, like I picked a fight right there. I said, okay, you know what? I really I want to know how you do that. And she's like, oh, it's a very scientific thing and all. I said, I don't have any doubts on how scientific your craft is. All I want to understand is how does it propose to cure anxiety and depression?
Mm-hmm.
And she genuinely thought that I'm genuinely interested. So she went on explaining the whole thing, that how graphology works and everything. I said, okay, so now if somebody is struggling with trauma, where the neural network has been rewired because of trauma, and you know they're functioning out of their limbic brain all the time, how do you propose to do this? So she says, oh, I never said that. And, you know, I'm like, counseling is always important. I said, no, you can't have counseling as an adjunct and graphology as like the mainstream thing, right? So, yes, people do get very drawn to healers otherwise. And there is still a lot of idea that, you know, you only go for psychotherapy when you need like, so people, I think, don't understand the difference between psychiatry and psychotherapy. So it's like
Right.
they confuse it with psychiatry and
Sure.
that approach, the medical model approach.
It kind of makes me want to have an adjunct now too, like Ari's therapy and burgers.
I think that's going to do really well.
Thank you.
Well, I had this experience when I was training and I was going through my personal therapy and I was searching for a therapist. I've spoken about this on Twitter actually, where I went to somebody who was on the approved list of therapists that I was supposed to be able to go to. And when I turned up, they were also a specialist in past life regression and offered to regress me back to a past life as part of that process for no other reason apart from that it might be interesting and to see kind of what happened and what kind of came up. And for me, I just think that is really dangerous, I think, as a practitioner to, I was in a position where I was strong enough to kind of say, actually, this is not what I want. I don't think this is going to be helpful. It could potentially be harmful, but many people might not be. And there was no purpose to it at all. It was just purely because she was interested in that type of thing and wanted to do that. And I think there is I think some therapists can be amazing and they don't necessarily have to have years and years and years of training, but also training really helps to kind of identify what our role is and what it is that we do and what it is we don't do. And I think that's really important actually to acknowledge that really what is our role and what are the things that we are supposed to be doing and what are the things that we really shouldn't be doing, I think.
Right.
Bang on. My beef with this entire thing is exactly that I have respect for all kinds of crafts, totally. But know, what is it that you can do and what is it you can't do, and that's okay. Everybody has a place. Like it's not like nobody is encroaching on your space.
Sure. Well, I remember in my early 20s being asked the question, what's the difference between a social worker, psychologist, and a psychiatrist? And I had no clue. I couldn't answer that question then.
Yeah, and I think what happens is, I was just telling someone this yesterday, that if you have like like an infection and you go to one doctor and it doesn't help, you will go to 5 more doctors until you figure out who is helping and who's making you better. But with something like counseling and psychotherapy, you have one bad experience, you just shut down. Like, you don't want to try this again, because it's really painful and traumatic to be to have been judged by your therapist or to have had any kind of a bad experience. So it just shuts down a lot of potential clients for a lot of therapists who are actually doing a good job.
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think people do get there with medical doctors as well, but I think the tolerance for it is a lot greater, right? Where someone might have one bad therapy experience and feel shut off or disconnected. It may take somebody like going to 10 different doctors and not having a response before they say, you know what, I think I can't be helped, or whatever the case may be, or this isn't for me. So I think people do get there, but I think, like you're saying, you're right. It's like there's way more tolerance for it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, tolerance is the factor. True.
I was thinking then, when you're both talking about that idea of people being able to be aware of when there's a problem, both medically or in psychotherapy, actually looking out for those warning signs and acknowledging, actually, this isn't me, this isn't a problem with me. Actually, this is a problem with the doctor or the psychotherapist in front of me. They're not listening, they're not taking on board what I say. And I think that would be useful, actually, if people had more education around that, about what to look for in a therapist, and what some of those kind of things might be. I think one of my bugbears is around I think we should be able to explain our practice to clients. We should be able to kind of explain what it is that we do, whichever background, whichever approach that we're using, so that people are kind of fully informed about that. And I think when we don't do that, I think that's when clients can get really confused, because sometimes they're led into something. They're thinking, where is this going? What is expected of me? What is happening during this process? And I think being able to explain some of that, I think, is really important, so that people aren't just lost in the middle of it all, thinking this is I don't really understand what's going on here.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
So, well, my next question, I wonder whether we've kind of covered this a little bit, actually, because my question was going to be around talking a little bit about how counselling and psychotherapy is organised within your particular country. I feel like we've talked about that quite a bit already, haven't we? So, was there anything anyone wanted to say on that, or are you happy for me to move on to the next question?
I think we can move on.
Yeah.
Go to the next one. Okay. So, is there any specific issues, challenges, or difficulties that you think that the counselling and psychotherapy professions face in your particular country right now, or any particular issues that you're feeling particularly passionate about within the profession?
I think we did mention a lot of those in the last few minutes, where we talked about the stigma and the alternative healing strategies coming and kind of railroading this thing. Yeah, and I think in my country, one of the issues is also, I find, is the lack of uniformity of training. So, like I was mentioning, that there are only a few accredited institutions which offer the MPhil program. Even in those, the standardization is missing. So there are a couple of them which are like really, really good with what they do. A couple of them are like, okay, so everybody wants to get in those two, and they don't. So when you come out, even with the same degree and the same qualification, when you pass out, it's like your approaches to practice is completely different, or the level of competence is very different. So I think that's a very important issue that needs to be probably looked into.
I'm really interested in hearing about that a little bit, actually, because in the UK, we've got a project at the moment which is called the Scoped Project, which is all the different membership bodies are trying to create a standardized competency framework so that we all fit into as therapists across the UK. But there's been quite a lot of backlash around that, because people or therapists are arguing, how can we standardize therapy? How can we make everybody the same? So it's interesting because you highlighted there, Prachi, around the difference between that standard of competence of being a competent therapist, but then do we all practice slightly differently, in how we do our therapy? So I don't know, what's the training like there, Prachi, in terms of the modality or the approaches that different people use? Is there lots of different approaches to therapy?
Most of it is eclectic. We don't have a lot of pure therapy practices, because in our training we are taught like a little bit of a lot. And then I also think that obviously every therapist has their own style of practicing, and I think naturally, based on who we are as people, we tend to gravitate towards a particular kind of therapeutic modality more than the others. And I think as we mature in our profession, that just tends to take center stage there. So that's absolutely all right. But when you're starting out, like with your license, I totally agree that there has to be some form of uniformity, because the course content is the same in all institutions. It's just how it is being delivered is the difference. So, then that's how your level of competence kind of differs when you come out, no matter what modality you choose to practice. There are some basic guidelines that everybody needs to be aware of. And I feel like there isn't enough training on how to be a therapist. It's like, okay, CBT does this and psychodynamic therapy does this, and all of that is there, and you have your textbooks and manuals and everything, but there isn't enough teaching on how you can be present in the session with your client, or how you can learn how to shut the door on the work and your personal life, and how to create healthy boundaries there with your clients within your personal life. Also about compassion fatigue. Nobody tells you about compassion fatigue. And it's like these youngsters, they will start working and suddenly they will have a caseload of like humongous caseloads, and they would be burning out, and they would not know what's hitting me, what's happening to me. They start doubting that whether I'm right for this profession or maybe I made a wrong choice, but by then it's too late for you to do anything else.
Right.
So nobody's talking about those things in training, and I think it's extremely important that that needs to be dealt with.
That's a great point, because it made me think of enough people that I've met over the last years, like professionals in the field and non-professionals in the field, or sort of people outside of the field who would say their sense of well-being and their own sort of experience of how they're feeling about themselves can get so easily wrapped up in how well are my clients doing,
Yeah.
and how good a job am I doing, right? And I think, to your point, yeah, that needs to be, that's an important part to have addressed for sure.
It's that I was thinking when you were talking, that idea that we can understand the theory of what we're doing and the practicalities and what's happening in the therapy room, but there's all those other things that are going on for us at the same time that we also need to be aware of as well as therapists. And like you were saying there about that idea of self-care, which, you know, it can be a bit of a throwaway line, can't it? You know, you just have to look after yourself, but actually it's a bit more complicated than that, because you really need to understand what is going on for you as a therapist and how that's impacting on your work and how the work's impacting on you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, all really good points. It also made me think of just how, you know, you can take whatever training you get, but the implementation of it is a very personal thing.
Yes.
Right. And I remember, like, very early on in my career, when I was just kind of still learning to walk, and somebody that had a few more years of experience than I did, and I looked up to them. I remember she said to me at one point, she said, with a very stern look on her face, she said, humor has no place in this profession. And that just like rocked me, because I went home that day thinking, like, well, if that's the case, then I've made a huge mistake with my life. I've made a huge mistake in this decision to do this work. And thank goodness that's not the case, right? Thank goodness statistics point overwhelmingly to it's the relationship that you experience with the client. It's the resources and skills that people bring to the session, to the experience, that accounts for the most significant pieces of effectiveness and change. But it just, like, as a newbie, just some of these ideas were like, oh boy, okay, how do I have to be? And then it was like, oh, I can find a way to be myself and still, you know, in the way that I relate to this work.
Yeah.
That, Ari, I think it just hits the nail right on the head there, because for me, like, when you're in training, you can listen to the teachers, can't you, and think, gosh, that's it, that is the way it is, and I can't do anything else. But when I'm teaching students, for me, I'm talking about, actually, you need to find your way as a therapist, how you bring all that aspect of you into that therapy relationship, and that can only be decided by you as the therapist, you know, of what works, what doesn't work, and how you are. And I think, but that's the exciting thing, I think, when you're training, is that you're still finding out how you're going to be as a therapist and what it's going to be like. So I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I heard stories, like, as I was kind of developing in my professional prowess, of, like, you know, certain therapists that people wanted to emulate, right? And they would see, like, videotape sessions or like transcribed sessions of them, and they were being like a jerk. And so they thought, like, if you wanted to be a good therapist, you also had to be a jerk.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
I think even as therapists, we really, as we move forward, we really grow into ourselves also. So I think there is some kind of a, you know, self check we need to do, like, every 5 years, of, you know, where I'm standing today and where I was 5 years ago, and what are the things that I've cultivated now, and what are the ideas that I've done away with. So I think this work is so powerful that it really helps us also grow as people, and it can always, I mean, it doesn't have to be one set mold, right? It can always, it's flexible.
Well, you know, there's something that I think is such an amazing tool for therapists that I don't do nearly enough. which is, you know, obviously with our client's permission to video record one of our sessions, and then for us to be able to watch it back and really sort of as a way of sort of micro development of our own skills. But then also, like you're saying, Prachi, to come back to that a couple of years later and just kind of notice, oh, what would I do differently now? Or like, right, to some of these things like, oh, I think I would have done this now. I don't think I would have done this anymore. I think that could be a really cool benchmark.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
I think working with students, kind of when they start and they think, well, when I'm working towards finishing the course, and that's when I am a therapist, and then kind of the realization that kind of, you know, partway through when it's like, actually, it's just a constant evolution all of the time. Like you were saying, Prachi, like spending some time reflecting on, well, where am I at now as a therapist? How have I changed? What am I looking to do in the future that's going to develop my skills even further? And I think you're right. It's just a constant evolution, isn't it? Constant change. Yeah. Okay, so my last question was going to be around what advice for students, but I feel like we've just covered that as well, haven't we? Naturally, by how we've covered our conversation.
Yeah.
You know, I love what I do, but when I came across that question, the cynic in me just was like, yeah, pick up a guitar or like do something else. That's not my
Yeah.
That's my joke advice.
Yeah.
I wouldn't actually say that.
But I think there's something in that around, well, for me anyway, around it's hard work, you know, it's a challenge for lots and lots of different reasons. And I think it isn't something that you can just pick up and think, well, training that, you know, I think that it takes a lot of commitment and a lot of self-exploration, I think. So if you're not up for that, yeah, maybe go and learn the guitar instead. I'm sure that's well, actually.
Peter, what was the question specifically again?
The question had been, if someone wanted to train as a therapist in your country, what advice would you give to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't have any better
people will often ask me for advice about what do I need to know if I want to go into private practice. That's another thing. But
and what would the answer to that be?
Well, I think for me, what I learned was if you feel competent and ready to start to do the work, then find a way to just start doing the work. I think I got so bogged down with like, I need to have X, Y, and Z, like a website and brochures and business cards. And I think I got so bogged down with that stuff that by the time I actually got around to actually doing the work, it was like a year later. And so my advice would be just find somebody that wants your services and just start doing the work. And then the rest of the stuff will come. And so I guess it's a way to think about it. If you're passionate about it and you want to learn and you want to train, like find a place that fits with your way of thinking or fits with a little bit your personality. Because I think so much about the work, for me anyways, right? In all the different approaches that I trained in and that I experienced, it wasn't until I connected with narrative therapy that I felt, oh, this is me. Like I walked into this training not really knowing much about it at all, but instead coming away with like, well, this is how I would normally be anyways. This is how I normally think about things anyways. This is how I would normally speak to people anyways. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, so this fits with who I am. This is where I need to be. So, you know, to find that personal connection and then just do it, seek it out.
Yeah,
that's really good advice.
It is, certainly, absolutely.
I think for me, if I was giving anyone any advice, actually, if you were setting up in private practice or as a trainee, I think for me, it's around making sure that you have the right people around you, the right support. So whether that's, you know, other students or whether that's the right supervisor or whatever, I think, because I think like we've been talking about, sometimes there is some views about therapy which are quite rigid and what it's about. And actually, I think if you explore and chat to lots of different therapists, you'll find out that it's maybe not quite as rigid as you might think. And there's lots of potential ways to be as a therapist, I think, which is exciting, I think.
Yeah.
I like that line, lots of potential ways to be a therapist. That's a nice one.
I love that too.
Yeah, I do.
Also,
But I wanted,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to say two things. One, I mean, in terms of advice, do not take shortcuts. I mean, even if it might take a little bit longer, it's always a good idea to invest the time and the money to do it the right way, because I find this happening a lot. A lot of people would think that, oh, if I just take this workshop and then I'll be able to do this, or if I just attend this seminar, I should be able to do this. But there are no shortcuts to this work, because there are no free lunches, right? If somebody is conducting a seminar for maybe half a day, and that actually takes about a year's training to learn, and they're charging you like a fraction of for it, they will also give you a fraction, right? You will not get what you will get for a year's work of training. So shortcuts, I think, are absolutely to be done away with. They don't serve very well. And the other thing would be that, just don't stop learning. I think once people get their license, so you need a certain amount of points every year for renewing that and upgrading that. So the idea of growth just becomes about that which ones do I have to do to get enough points so that I can get my upgradation. So you stop learning for the passion of it.
Sure.
So that might get you your stable license renewal every year, but it doesn't make you grow as a therapist. So learn for the passion of it also, besides doing that.
It's beautiful because I've seen over the years, so many therapists, whatever the popular approach or the popular modality of the day is, right? People will go out and get their sort of 1 day or 2 day course to be able to call themselves that.
Right.
And my encouragement to people is start with just being a good therapist.
Mhm.
Right. And I think part of that is learning how to blend how you show up in the session and what you bring to the table with the philosophical underpinnings and the theoretical frameworks and the approaches that you will learn, that you learn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant advice there, I think, for anyone thinking about training to be a therapist, whatever country that you're in, actually. And I think what's been lovely about this panel discussion is actually I found more similarities, I think, actually, in all of our different countries, actually, rather than differences, which I think is really lovely. Well, we've come to the end of our hour, so I think it would be a good moment actually to kind of conclude the panel today. But just thank you to Prachi and Ari for coming today and taking the time out to kind of talk to us at different time zones. So it was nice that we could actually come together at a time where we could all roughly be in the daytime, I think. So thank you so much for coming on this panel. I really appreciate your time.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for everyone in the Therapist Connect community who's been watching. Our details are running across the bottom of the screen. So if you want to access any of the other debates, just click on those and you can have a look at them on our website. And thanks very much for watching. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.